So we've been talking about this thing called invitation to discipleship. Last week we talked about how once we've been invited into being that disciple, one of the things that we're invited to be a part of is service. He has called us to be a servant. If we're going to be in the image of Christ, he was a servant of all. He humbled himself and made himself of no reputation, becoming a servant of all, even obedient to the cross. So we know that is who he was, and that's how he was. And so if we're going to be in his image, then we understand up front when we walk into discipleship that that's what we're walking towards. We're walking to a place of servitude. That's what he's calling us to. And so we were talking about that last week, about being invited to serve within our complex community of believers. That as this gospel spreads and more people become a part of it, a lot of different people bring a lot of different perspectives. They bring a lot of different life experiences, and they bring a lot of different skills and abilities, and they bring a lot of different difficulties. And I didn't mean to look at you when I said difficulties, Paul. It was just a chance event. And so, ultimately what happens is the more that we have, the community of believers, it becomes more complex. It becomes more intricate. More people are trying to work alongside one another, and so it can become more complex. So we are called to serve, to recognize it, to serve within it, as well as to serve out of it. That it's from this community that we're actually even serving others. And so in all of this, we've talked about the approach to discipleship, that a person that is initially coming to Christ, we understand that they first and foremost need to know who it is that's inviting them into relationship, who it is that's inviting them to be a disciple. That Jesus walked to a lot of people and said, "Hey, will you follow me?" And it was important that they knew who he was. In fact, he spent several years explaining to them who he was. And that as they agreed and as they followed him, there were a certain broadening and expanding of their mindset, their worldview, their preconceived ideas of what religion looked like, of what relationship with God looked like, of what service was, and what it meant to be a part of the kingdom of God. And so all of that, their minds were expanded as he redefined some of those. And there was a reprioritizing of life and of things in their world. And so to talk about all this, and I realize that I'm rehashing this, but we're going to conclude it today, and I don't want us to forget that, number one, that's the process that everybody goes through when they step into this thing called discipleship. That things are challenged, their preconceived worldviews, the way that they normally have done life, it gets challenged. And in light of this new gospel and the new disciplines that Jesus is inviting people to be a part of. And so as that changes, sometimes it can be uncomfortable and sometimes that can be difficult. And we see that there were those in Jesus' day, when things started to change for them, they lashed out and they ultimately hung Jesus on a cross because they weren't comfortable with the way that he was bringing about and what was changing as far as how to interact with God, how it was different. And so we understand that that's a difficult thing. And so whether it's somebody who's initially stepping into Christianity or somebody who's plateaued in their Christian walk, to step from a place of where I am to where he's leading me, ultimately some things are going to get rewritten in my life. Some things are going to get rewritten in my heart. I need to be open to that. I need to understand that it's coming. And I need to understand that sometimes it's going to be difficult and that it's not always what's going to be easiest for me. And I think sometimes we can think, we hear so much the prosperity doctrines and everything's going to be good, but as we've been talking about on Wednesday nights in Psalm 139, that knowing that his hand's on our life, wherever it leads us, we just want to be in his hand, right? And so we know that. And so we step into this, and the more people that step in and become a part of that community, having their minds expanded and having things rewritten in their hearts, we create this community of believers, and then we begin to serve within it, and we begin to serve one another. And so that's where we were at last week, was talking about that. And one of the challenges that particularly the disciples ran into when they were stepping from a place of following Jesus and he's teaching them, and they're getting ready to step into an actual place of ministry, right before he's taken up into heaven in a cloud after the Calvary and he raises again and goes to heaven. It's at that point that they step into this thing that we would call ministry. But before they could step into that, there were some things that were challenged, and there's some preconceived ideas of what the Messiah was, what the Messiah was going to do, and how he was going to behave and how he wasn't going to behave. And so there were a lot of things that were being rewritten with them because they didn't expect that their Messiah was going to die on a cross. They didn't expect that he was going to be the suffering servant that Isaiah talked about. They expected him to come in, guns a-blazing, ready to take over the current, and so they had to have that rewritten. And so there's a lot of things that and a lot of those were just traditions, oral teachings that come through that ultimately got challenged by Jesus, and so they had to allow their minds to be expanded to allow Jesus to do what he was going to do. And here's the crazy part about it. This is what I think makes some of that kind of stuff so difficult. When you sign up to follow somebody, for example, them saying, I'm signing up to follow the Messiah. Messiah is going to come in and he's going to set up a kingdom and he's going to be a new king and there's going to be deliverance and there's going to be this awesomeness. And if I follow him now, then when that time comes, I'm going to be top notch in the kingdom. I mean, I'm going to, you know what I mean? And that's kind of, it's easy to sign up for it when that's what you think is ahead. But then when you sign up for it, it feels like the bait and switch when he's like, wait. No, it's not glorious grandeur. It's a bloody cross. All of a sudden, I'm signed up for something that I didn't really mean to sign up for, right? And that's a difficult thing. It would be difficult. It would almost feel like a bait and switch, right? It would almost feel like I don't even know how to put it. Feel like you'd been lied to. But sometimes when you feel like you've been lied to, or when what I thought I signed up for isn't what things are actually turning out to be, it's easy to want to just withdraw from that and to say, wait a minute, this isn't what I signed up for. I signed up for awesomeness of a Messiah, and you're dying on a cross. I want to be like you. I want to run around in fancy robes and popularity and authority and power. And now you're telling me I need to be like a child, and you're telling me that I need to be the greatest, I need to be the least, and you're telling me that I'm going to have to suffer and die. Wait a second. This is different. And it took 3.5 years. It took 3.5 years of walking with Jesus and dealing with him on a daily basis to have those preconceived ideas rewritten and to allow them to buy into a new Messiah, a new idea of Messiah, a new idea of kingdom on earth, and to buy into their place in it, even though it was not a fancy place. In fact, right before he leaves, he tells them, sorry, but some of you guys are going to die. They're going to hate you, and they're going to try to kill you. It's like, wait a second. This is a little bit different than when I was fishing. When I was fishing before, it wasn't come and follow me so that you can die, right? No, it's come and follow me because I'm Messiah. It just feels different. It feels different. So anyway, some of their preconceived ideas had to be rewritten. And so we understand that today we're not waiting for a Messiah necessarily. We believe that he's come. We know that he's come in Jesus Christ. And so what he has to offer, it's there. But when we step into a true place of discipleship, things are going to be rewritten in our lives. And a lot of times it's going to challenge our preconceived ideas of what it means to be a part of a church, of what it means to be a follower and disciple of Jesus Christ. And to know that when it comes and it challenges us, that we're better if instead of withdrawing from that and recoiling, because it's different, but that I lean into that because I understand that he's calling me to a place that not a lot of people get to go to. Not a lot of people sign up to be martyrs, right? Not a lot of people sign up for sacrifice. And so that was what we talked about, this service. Service. He was up front with his disciples. He was up front with them that I'm calling you to a life of service, of serving one another. As you've seen me do, this is what I want you to do. That was his message. So much so that he got down and he washed their feet. Right? And he tells them, he said, this is my body which is broken for you. This is my blood. This represents my blood. Now drink this. And that he was like, listen, I am spending myself for you. Understand that that's what I'm calling of you. I'm calling you to spend yourself for others. And we understand that only works if you do it in love, right? That's what the apostles wrote. Whatsoever you do, do it in love. Of all of the things, the greatest of these is love. It's got to be there. And so he led with that, and he's building this foundation of discipleship because he wanted them to know what they were walking into. He wanted them to know. And we need to know what we're walking into. We need to know what we're being called to be a part of. And I want to throw this phrase out just for your hearing, and let it play over in your mind a little bit. Let it be something that you kind of wrestle with. To say this, there's a difference. In fact, let me just double check my stuff. Yeah, I can say it now. There's a difference between being a follower of Jesus Christ and being a disciple of Jesus Christ. There were those who followed him for loaves and fishes. And there were those who followed him for miracles and the things that they could get. But there were only a few who followed because they wanted to take unto themselves the disciplines of Christ. To be a disciple means I'm taking his disciplines. I'm taking into myself the things that he says, this is what ought to govern and this is what ought to rule your life. Not legalistically, he's not saying these are the rules, you can and you can't. In fact, he fought against and he argued against legalism. He argued against them when they said, hey, you didn't wash your hands. He's like, I'm not worried about rules. I'm worried about a life discipline, and I'm worried about heart disciplines. If you're going to be a disciple of mine, these things need to be rewritten. These things need to be changed. Right? And so one of the things when we talk then about the ministry and the service that he's calling us to, and this is where we concluded last week, was that he's calling them, what he exampled and what he was calling his disciples to be, the disciplines in their life was, number one, for the preservation of the gospel, to preserve the message of his life and his death and his burial, to make sure that that stayed the same. But secondly, it was to bring about merciful disciplines. That their ministry, their service, was a life full of merciful disciplines. In other words, self-controlled behaviors fueled by mercy. Now listen, we stand 2,000 years after Christ. Can I just throw this out and say that mercy was not big within the religious world of the day? When Jesus is leading with mercy, as much as they understood it and as much as they talked about it, and they would talk about that, the mercies of their God, and they could sing the Psalms, what was lived out for them by their religious leaders was not mercy. Right? It was the opposite. When they're bringing people to Jesus and saying, caught in the act of adultery, should we kill her? That's not leading with mercy. I'm sorry, that's not a life discipline. When you go hunting people down, looking for somebody who's doing wrong so that you might pour out punishment on them, that's the opposite of mercy. And so Jesus is changing that. And so this is a major mind shift for them. And so he's calling them to self-controlled behaviors that are fueled by mercy, which is exactly what he did. He was moved with compassion on people, and he healed them, and he forgave their sins. he was fueled by mercy. And so when we talk about a life full of merciful disciplines, it suggests this ongoing life disciplines that promote mercy, forgiveness, and restoration. Now, if we just pause right there and we lay this on our own lives and we say, listen, what he has called you to do is participate in actions of mercy, forgiveness, and restoration. Look around your life. Look within your world, and where are you serving mercifully? Where are you serving forgiveness? See, I feel like, and I'm diverting a little bit, but I feel like, as far as in my heart, I feel like I want to get us beyond Christian management into a place of Christian burden. There's a difference between managing jobs within the church, managing positions within a church, of managing duties and responsibilities. Well, they've got to be there. Somebody's got to change the lights and somebody's got to teach Sunday school. I get that. But I want us to get out of this place of management and stepping into a place of burden that says, I need to find a place where I can show mercy. I need to find a place where I can example forgiveness. I need to find a place where I can participate in the restoration of somebody, whether they be a brand new sinner who's walked into the doors and they need to experience all those, or whether it's somebody who's already a part of our community of faith who has fallen, or who just continually lives a cantankerous life. I'm looking for a place of service. Would to God that we had a church full of people that said, I want to be in service. I want to be in service to others. To the point of saying this, right knowledge takes a back seat to loving service. Right knowledge takes a back seat to loving service. Now, when I say that, let me be clear that right knowledge, even though it takes a back seat to loving service, it's still in the car. Okay, you still have to know righteousness. You still have to know right things. But as far as what we lead with, I think that's what Paul was talking about when he challenged his brethren, and he said, listen, he said, there are those among you who don't agree with eating food offered to idols, right? And we get it. We understand. He even lays this out. He says, we understand the idols are nothing. They're not real gods. And because they're not real gods, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if anything was offered to them or not. They have no bearing at all. And so there's nothing wrong with eating that food. But if somebody among you is concerned with that, don't lead with your correct knowledge of it doesn't matter. Rather, lead with a mindset of mercy and service that says, whatever I can do to benefit you, that's what I want to do. Even if, now listen to me, I want you to hear this, even if it means encroaching on my own personal liberties. Again, we're talking about being made in the image of Jesus Christ. We're trying to model him. And here's a guy who, God in flesh, who had every right. He had every right to exercise his power and to exercise his knowledge and his whatever of being God. He could have grasped at his power as God and avoided the cross. He could have done that. Is it Colossians 2 or Philippians 2? The emptying out of him. Either one. Read them both. But he empties himself out. He did not grasp at those divine privileges that were available to him. Yet he denied himself what was rightfully his in order that he might serve humanity by dying on the cross. And there are times, listen, there are times when I deny myself something I have every right to so that I might be more effective in ministering to other people. But it only works. It only works when we are a true disciple of Jesus Christ and we understand that our life is for the service of others. This is a very selfless kind of way of living. This is a very selfless kind of way of living. Also within the merciful disciplines of life is forgiveness. Forgiveness falls here. And let me just say this, forgiveness is a discipline that we have to train ourselves to. Okay? And in fact, I'm going to plug it again, but immediately the week after Easter, all right, we're launching into a 4-part series on forgiveness that everybody needs to be a part of. If you've ever questioned, if you've ever asked the question, what is forgiveness? What does it look like? How do I forgive? How do I know when I've forgiven? If you've ever asked any of those questions and been left, you need to come to these forgiveness. You need to bring somebody, because I'm telling you, I'm going to answer those questions. Because here's the thing. I challenge you over the next couple of weeks. Do this. Start asking people, what is forgiveness? And if they can't give you a 1 or 2 sentence answer, then they don't know what forgiveness is. Because if I were to ask you, what's a pew? You could do that in a sentence, right? What's a haircut? You can do it in a sentence. What's forgiveness? If you can't do it in a sentence, you don't know what it is. If you don't know what it is, you can't tell somebody how to do it. And you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed at how many people don't have an answer, or how different the answers are. Anyways, that was my plug for forgiveness. I'm going to keep doing that because I think this is an important one. I think this is a vital one. Jesus said, you are forgiven according to the way that you forgive, right? And so we need to know how to forgive. We need to know. Sorry, getting distracted. So in our service, and I need to run through this. I need to get moving faster. In our service to our community of believers and in our reactions, what ends up happening then is a reprioritizing of our priorities, of the things that are valuable to us. It rewrites what things mean to us. We are no longer living for self, but rather in the loving service of others. Now let me just, again, throw this out. This is what we're talking about, what I'm launching into here. This is for the disciple of Jesus Christ. So for those who say, I have not bought into being a disciple of Jesus Christ, I'll follow for what I can get, but I don't know that I'm disciple material, then you're free to check out, or you're free to say, you know what, that's not for me. You disciple, it's crazy, whatever. You're off the hook, all right? Because what we're talking about now is for disciples of Jesus Christ and for those who want that. If you don't want that, this doesn't apply to you. But we reprioritize. We're no longer living for self, but in the loving service of others. And so what happens when we reprioritize, we'll see its effects of our reprioritization in our possessions, or in the way that we view things like our possessions and our social status, my popularity. All of a sudden, those things mean something different to me. There was a man that came up to Jesus. He was a follower of Jesus Christ. And he came up to Jesus and he said, hey, Jesus, I want to be a disciple. And Jesus said, okay, then I need you to reprioritize the things that are valuable in your life. I need you to take everything you've got, sell it, and give it to the poor. And you know what? That guy could not reprioritize. And he walked away sorrowful. Why did he walk away sorrowful? Because he knew that because he could not reprioritize, that he was not going to be a disciple of Christ. His life was destined to be simply a follower. Can you get to heaven by being a follower of Jesus Christ? Probably. Probably most likely. I think there's going to be a lot of people That they come and they repent, they're baptized of their sins, and they're baptized in Jesus' name, they're filled with the Holy Ghost, and then they spend their life following. And they never engage in service. They never engage in ministry. And you know what? They'll probably make it to heaven. But he walked away sorrowful. And I'm telling you right now, this happens more often than you think. We start to grow towards Christ, and all of a sudden he says, okay, well then we need to start reprioritizing some things in life. And all of a sudden, when that is uncomfortable, when you're starting to rewrite what's valuable in my life, a lot of people walk away sorrowful. See, Jesus said, reprioritize. He taught, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. I need you to have the mindset. I need you to become a child. Be willing to be overlooked. I need you to come as a child. Be willing to be undervalued for your contributions to society. Right? Be willing to be taken advantage of. You need to become as a child. You need to have childlike faith. But in that, nobody likes to be disrespected. But as long as you're more than 4 feet tall, you're always talking down to the kids. And so if we're going to be like Christ, people are going to talk down to us. He says you got to be okay with this rewriting and this reprioritizing of life. In the early church, and I'm going to run through this fast. The early church saw a lot of generous giving from one community of believers to the others in need. And in their giving, it didn't put believers in a bind. But their giving and their stepping into a place of service was done with a grateful heart to the service of those in need. And within the reprioritized community, money and possessions are no longer rewards of life. Now they become tools and they become things that I can use in order to minister to others. That's why the church in Rome was able to take up a collection and give it to the church in Jerusalem. Right? That's why when we buy into this idea of a true community of disciples, we can take collections and we give, and a lot of you do, money to missions and say, here, go and spread the gospel. I know that there are those that are in need. And we do that because things have been rewritten in our life, and we understand that what God has blessed me with may not be just so that he makes me happy. It may be so that I can give it to someone else. But that's a rewriting of priorities. And so following the example of Christ, he gave his very life as a ransom for many. Because here's the deal, he didn't have money and he didn't have things, but he could give his life. And he did give it. He gave his life. It wasn't something that was taken from him. It was something that he willingly gave. And so if we continue in this vein, money and things, when it comes to those things for the disciples, giving is not always comfortable. But the model that seems to be is, I don't give foolishly, okay? I don't give ridiculously. I don't give more than I have or more than I can afford, but it does reflect giving beyond my comforts. And I'm not just talking about money. It's probably one of the most uncomfortable things it is to give up is our money, but let me tell you, time is another one. Time and energy. I'm telling you, I'm amazed and it breaks my heart sometimes at people's unwillingness to give of their time, even to the attendance of church, let alone to the service of others. It's uncomfortable to me. It's requiring too much of me. I need to make church more convenient. And I don't see that that's what Jesus was calling his disciples to. He was not calling to them to a life of more convenience. And it hurts. It hurts sometimes. To think, and I don't know if it's just, I'm probably rambling a little bit too much there. When you find something valuable, Jesus told the parables. He said the guy that found the great pearl and he found the treasure in a field and he gave up everything. And it didn't feel like a sacrifice to him because he was getting something that was of greater value. You know what I mean? And I think when and it may not be initial, it may not be right away, but the life that is becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ, stepping into those disciplines, all of a sudden the things that they're giving up don't feel like sacrifices anymore because they value the thing that they're getting in place of it more than the things that they're giving up. And that doesn't happen just overnight. Let me tell you, just to paint a picture, this is how this happens. You start investing in a life. They may not come to church, and you start walking with, and you start doing life with somebody, and they're struggling with some things. And it's a year down the road, and you just keep sharing Jesus, and you keep praying with them, and you're there with them through the highs and through the lows, and it requires a lot of time from you. But then all of a sudden, something happens and they say, you know what, I think I want to come to church. And they come and they get baptized and they get filled with the Holy Ghost, and you watch them at an altar or you watch them stand at a pew and they weep before God. And all of a sudden, the reward is so much greater than every hour or every phone call that we took late at night. All of a sudden, those things don't feel like sacrifices. Those things now are perceived as investments because I got something and it's not, and I don't even have it. I didn't even get that. I was just able to witness what my sacrifice produced, what God was able to produce through my sacrifice. And all of a sudden, and after you experience that, all of a sudden, that now becomes so much more valuable, and I'm more freely willing to give of my time and my energies and my efforts. And I think that's why sometimes when we get stuck in the place of just come and attend and go home, and we come and attend and go home, we never buy into, we never get to experience the true value. That's why David said, taste and see that the Lord is good, because I'm telling you, if you taste this and you experience what we're talking about, it's going to be worth every sacrifice. But again, that's only true disciples. Followers will taste the bread and the fish, and they'll be satisfied for a season. But true disciples taste of servitude. Jesus said, you come and drink of what I have to offer you, and you'll never thirst again. But you eat this, and you're going to hunger again. And if you're living for the moment, and you're living to get, you're going to get hungry again. But when you tap into the eternal and you tap into the joys of introducing somebody to Jesus Christ and of giving them the gospel and seeing it preserved in their life, you tap into that, that doesn't fade. That never gets old. And so what ends up happening then? How can a person reprioritize so drastically? How can you allow those things to be which we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think the question remains, how can we reprioritize so drastically? And I think this is one of the things that Jesus establishes. This is one of the things that he does to help them. And you're going to see, as we talk about this, you're going to see a lot of rewriting, you're going to see a lot of expanding of boundaries, and a lot of changing what they focused on. Changing the things that they valued even. As he tries to answer, he tries to equip them to better reprioritize certain things in their life. In that, he calls them to live in light of Jesus' return. Because if the sales pitch is, come and walk with us, and you know the guy who's been doing the miracles and the guy who's been feeding a lot of people and that guy, if you follow us, you get to be with him a lot. When he dies and ascends into heaven and all these things, dies, raised again and goes to heaven, you can't use that as a sales pitch anymore. You can't say, come and walk with Jesus. Right? And so, what we see happening then, and I got to try to stay online so I stay hopefully more clear. Calling his disciples, those who are living in his disciplines, merciful disciplines to bring about mercy, forgiveness, and restoration, calling him to preserve the gospel and do these things. He predicted difficulty for his followers following his departure and before his second coming. So he lays out for them, he says, and I mentioned it before, he says they're going to hate you, but know that they've hated me first. They're going to kill you, but it's okay. It's because of me, and that's cool. But he let them know up front. He let them know ahead of time that kind of stuff was happening. And so what transitions and what that ends up inviting is a couple of things. Number one, their hope then rests in their understanding, their faith, and their expectation that Jesus is coming again. He said, I'm going to go away, but I will come again. And until I do, I'm going to send my comforter. All right? So they had a hope and they had an expectation of him coming again. And he places this out there for them to focus on. So think about now, he hands them this hope and look at what it does now. Think about how this hope affects the early church community of believers as they begin to minister to one another, as they endure suffering. I know that Jesus is coming back so I can endure for a season. And all of a sudden, those that come in and accuse them, and those that come in and verbally assault them, and those that come in and challenge them, their words don't carry as much weight because they have hope in the words of Christ who says, I'm coming again. Right? If I know that there's an end, if I know that there's something, it doesn't mean anything to me. You say what you want to, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter remains, Jesus is coming back. And so whether I am alive and able to meet him in the sky, or whether I die and later on meet him, either way, I get to meet him in the end. And so whatever you're saying to me, it doesn't matter. Or how they mourned the loss of their fellow Christians, families and friends. It was different. If it's just a loss for loss's sake, then it hurts more than if it's I'm going to see him again, right? And we still comfort one another with those words. And so one of the great challenges that Jesus faced while he walked on this earth was preparing his disciples to learn to live without one of their greatest traditions, the temple and temple life. Because for the entire time while Jesus is walking the earth, the temple is the center of all of their religious tradition. Temple life and the sacrifices, that's what it was. That was the hub of everything. And so what he has to do is he has to prepare them. He drops a bomb on them and he's like, yeah, listen, there's not going to be one stone standing on top of another. I mean, this is a beautiful thing and I get that, but it's fixing to be destroyed. You think about that. I'm getting about 5 thoughts ahead of myself here. He had to prepare them for a drastic shift in one of their preconceived ideas and their understanding of what church was centered around. By saying, because after he left and the temple was destroyed, now all of a sudden Judaism is kind of left to scramble. They don't have a place to offer their sacrifices. They don't have that central hub. But thankfully, Jesus had done a good enough job in redirecting his disciples. They had already removed the temple and the things of the temple, the sacrifices and what they were. He had already removed their focus from that and placed it upon himself. So that when the temple fell, it didn't affect them. The awesome part of this was what it did was that it protected them from getting caught up in other religious revolutions. It protected them from other religions that would spring out of this. Because Jesus had already redirected. He had already de-emphasized the temple and emphasized himself as being the center, not only himself, but of his coming again. And that became the heart of their religion. That became the heart and the focus. And that's what everything's centered around, is Jesus is coming again. So the things that they do, the things that they do are focused on the preservation of the gospel, merciful disciplines, because Jesus is coming again. And all of those things become the hub for what's going on, for what drives them and what motivates. I can tolerate persecution, and I can tolerate difficulties, and it helped them, okay? But understand, that was a huge rewriting, a redefining of their boundaries of religion, the boundaries of relationship with God. And they had to allow that to be rewritten. So he prepared them early to accept that Jesus and a person's relationship to him was now going to be the center of discipleship and religion, and not the regularity of the temple. And so that was a huge blow to tradition in the way that people perceived relationship to God and how they were expected to live their lives. And so Jesus was able to give them insights into future events so that they wouldn't get caught up in the shell-shocked, knee-jerk reactions that were going to come from those who try to reestablish normalcy in the light of a rocked world when the temple fell. All right? And when we say the thing, you hear the phrase, and some of us probably said it before, if I only knew now, or if I only knew then what I know now, I would have done something different. Well, Jesus gave them that gift. He says, I'm letting you know now what they're going to know then. And so go ahead and rewrite, right? And he has given us the same thing. He gives us his word. And he's like, listen, I'm telling you right now. Kingdoms are going to rise and fall. There's going to be wars and rumors of war. I'm telling you all of these things. People are going to come and they're going to try to change the gospel. And they're going to try to make Christ something different than what he is. Understand, those things are coming. He's told us. And he said, listen, I'm coming again. And so if somebody comes preaching another gospel in another name or however, understand it's coming. I'm telling you now, because when it comes, I don't want you to be surprised, and I don't want you to be scrambling to try to figure out what's going on. You know now. So let's get ourselves focused on preserving this gospel, living merciful disciplines, and looking for his coming. Let's get that settled now, because those things do not change. When the rest of this world is shaken and everything else that we could depend, because I'm telling you this, we're about 3 stupid people away from living in a world full of war. All it takes is a couple of idiots to go and do something stupid, and now we are a nation at war. And America and the United States as we know it is completely different. And if the hub and the foundation of our relationship with God and what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be in service to Jesus Christ centers around this building, then when the day comes, if it ever comes where we can't get here, what now happens to your religion? What now happens to your relationship with God? I don't want to come across as doomsday-ish or, bad things are coming. I'm not a bad omen kind of thing. I'm just saying the potential's there. We're a couple of generations removed from our religion being illegal in our own country. Or at least our ability to be able to gather like this, our ability to be able to say this is what it takes to be saved, not preserved by a constitution anymore. Listen, I'm telling you. And so if this building and the idea of a guy standing up with a microphone telling you this is what needs to do, if that's the source of your relationship with God, I'm telling you, you're in trouble. If God willing, you are able, your life is lived within the world where that is the norm, and God bless you. But if the world changes before then, we need to make sure that our boundaries have been rewritten to the point of where my relationship with God, it's based on preserving the gospel, living mercifully, and looking to his coming. Those have got to be my parameters. Those have got to be my boundaries. And then what happens is our gathering together here helps to facilitate those things. We come together so that we can hear and make sure I'm still thinking properly about the gospel. Making sure, and hopefully we get to the place where the things that we're doing are ministries of mercy and reconciliation and forgiveness. And we get to be a part of those, and we create those as a community, and we get to serve each other, and we get to encourage one another in the words of Jesus coming again. And that's why we get to come together. It's because those other things are at the heart of what we're doing. Not we come to church first so that we can do those things. Reprioritizing. Reprioritizing. For the early Christian church, one of the main central components to their foundation of faith was the return of Jesus Christ. And that truth had its full effect on the community of believers. So let me rephrase that a little bit differently and say this. What kind of effect on your world does Christ's return have? Because Jesus is coming again, what happens in your life now? For the early Christian church, it was everything. Everything they did, their walking in the disciplines of Christ was because he was coming again. That was at the heart of it. And I feel like if I can be a little bit pointed and say, the coming of Christ is not a fearful thing that we preach. It's not something that we threaten sinners with. It's something that we encourage one another with, to say he's coming again. And we allow that to motivate us to more fully embrace what he wants us to be and what he's trying to live out through us. If we are possessors of his Spirit, if his Spirit lives within us and we're walking in the Spirit, then that becomes a joyful thing. That becomes a mark, something we're pursuing. It's not to be feared. Truth had its full effect on the community of believers. Their priorities, their investments, their ambitions of those early Christ disciples were, and even today, should continue to be shaped by the knowledge of Christ's return. You know now what a lot of people are going to know later, that Jesus is coming again. So let your life be formed. Let it be shaped. Let it be molded by that truth. Make changes now because of what you know is coming in the future. Don't wait. Who in here would not have bought up Google when it first started, if you knew then that Google was going to be what it was going to be, right? Nobody's going to be pushing that off and saying, I think I'll wait until it hits about $250 a share before I jump in. No, you're going to be like, only $1 a share? Bring it on. Only $5? Bring it. You know what I mean? Or Yahoo or the internet or whatever these things are that burst onto the scene. If you knew, let your life today be shaped. Let it be shaped by the knowledge of what is to come. And so one of the things, if I can say this just kind of in passing, and I want to be kind with this, and I don't want to sound attacking, but I think we need to be careful sometimes. I think we need to be careful when we get caught up in too many details of the end, and we start looking to Revelation particularly, we start looking for end-time things to be a roadmap for us instead of simply speaking the truth of his return, right? When we look at when Jesus talks about end times, his emphasis is not on the details of the events. That's why he talked in parables, but rather his emphasis was on being prepared. His emphasis was on being ready, not saying, if you learn enough and if you can decipher my secret codes, and if you can align what I'm saying here with the things that are happening in the future, then you'll know the right path and you'll know the right steps and you'll know when to step into Christianity really severely. That's not what he's not. That wasn't the point of Revelation. That wasn't the point. It wasn't so that we would have a roadmap to navigate through the end times, but rather that we would simply know that they're coming and live our lives according, and be prepared. Be prepared for when it comes. That was the message. It was, listen, make sure your candles, make sure that your lanterns have oil, make sure that they are tended, make sure that you are ready. Because we know that in the end, only God and those who belong to him and his word will survive. His emphasis was on being ready. 1 Thessalonians 5:1 says, "But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as travail upon a woman with child." It's not that we look for people saying peace and safety. What he's saying is mankind is ignorant of their knowledge of the end times. They're going to say one thing, and it's going to be something totally different. Just like they were wrong when they were talking about the Messiah. They said the Messiah was going to do this, and here he came and he did this. It was completely different. And that's what he just said. He said, listen, they're going to say peace and safety, and they don't have a clue. And they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Did that mean that they knew when the coming of the Lord was? No, they knew that their hope was in the fact that he was coming. So what does it mean to watch and to be prepared for his coming? If that's the call, to watch and to be ready, to watch and to be ready, if that's what does that mean? Does it simply mean that I make sure that my own house is in order? Is that my goal and is that my focus? Do we make Christianity the Black Friday scramble for benefits? I don't care who I have to step on. I don't care who I have to punch in the neck. I don't care who I have to run over to get that thing. All I know is Christianity is get out of my way. My family needs to be made safe. Is that what it means to be ready? Or does it mean that my life, I extend my life further into the true disciplines, what it means to be a disciple, and that becomes the driving force into me to make sure that I'm fully living out his calling for my life? To teach, show, share the gospel with love and mercy in light of his coming return. Because I'll tell you this, if that's what you're doing, you will be ready. Disciples are called to reorder our everyday priorities in light of the eternal realities, hopes, and expectations of Jesus Christ. And the realignment of our priorities, our possessions, and our light in light of our response to his invitation to discipleship, meaning we continually give ourselves to the things that last, the spiritual fruit, to souls, and to God's word. Disciples, true disciples of Jesus Christ, live in light of eternity. They're big picture people. Big picture people who can look to the end or who can look to that and say, I understand what this costs me, but I am invested in getting to the end. The promise of Jesus' return, it opens our understanding that true stability in life does not come from jobs, from possessions, from power, or even from our relationships, because all of those things come and go. But the one thing that does not change is Jesus Christ and him crucified, the fact that he rose again and the fact that he's coming again. The things that are done for Christ will last. And so our aim then becomes to please him. Priority number one of true disciples is to please him. And the great end or goal in discipleship is to understand fully that Jesus has invited us to follow him. And it's an invitation to a cross-bearing life. It's an invitation to a self-sacrificing life. It's one that gives of ourself for the promotion, the salvation, and the success of others. It is an invitation to be made in his image, the image of a suffering servant. It is unreasonable. This is not an easy phrase, but let me just say it. It is unreasonable for us to expect to celebrate the resurrection of Christ without first sharing in his cross. Philippians 2:3, and I'm running to a close here. It says, don't be selfish, I think I'm reading New Living Translation. Philippians 2 and 3. Don't be selfish. Don't live to make a good impression on others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't think only about your own affairs, but be interested in others too and what they're doing. Your attitude should be the same that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not demand and cling to his rights as God. He made himself nothing. He took the humble position of a slave and appeared in human form. And in human form, he obediently humbled himself even further by dying a criminal's death on the cross. That's self-emptying like Christ did. But be it known that such self-emptying and such self-denial, it must be done voluntarily. It will not have the same effect if it is forced out of you. That's what's so powerful about understanding that Jesus Christ is God in flesh. He was not some demigod who was forced to Calvary. It was not something that he had to do because his dad told him to. This was something that God himself partook upon himself, willingly self-emptying. And so the great power then of the cross is the fact that it was done voluntarily and in love. And it's in baptism then that we get to join to Christ. In a very literal and spiritual sense, baptism is often the entrance into discipleship. And then we walk in this newness of life, is living then with Christ's disciplines, self-sacrificing, mercy-driven, in light of Christ coming again. That's what he's calling us to do. And here's the deal. And I said this in a different way earlier. Turn that down, if not off. Cross-bearing is not only about death and sacrifice. We look at the cross and we see the death and we see the sacrifice. But the cross was not just about death and sacrifice. It was even done in light of a resurrection. And so the things that we do, the things that we sacrifice, the things that we give up, not done with the intent of just seeing the death and just seeing the sacrifice, but I understand that there is a resurrection coming. I understand that there is a coming Savior. I understand that he is coming. Everything is done in light of Christ's return. So the cross is viewed in light of the resurrection. So when discipleship feels as though it is too costly, we look forward to the big picture, to the joy set before us so that we too can endure our costly sacrifices. Valuable things are now the things that promote Christ-likeness rather than self. And eventually the discipline of Christ begins to reflect outwardly the character of Christ. When we have our priorities rewritten, the things that are valuable to us change when we become a true disciple of Christ. Because now we're living to promote him. We're living to promote his image in our life and in the lives of others. But it requires a rewriting of our boundaries and a rewriting of the things in our life in light of his return. Lord, I love and I thank you so much that you have called us not just to be followers, but to be disciples of you. And I pray, God, that this word would be written in our hearts, God, in new ways. And I pray, God, that you would have your way in our hearts and our lives and help us to love you and to honor and praise you today in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, let's worship.